Today's video, I'm talking about narcissistic abuse, complex PTSD, which I often talk about together a lot because while narcissistic abuse is not the only cause of complex PTSD, most people that have been through narcissistic abuse wind up with complex PTSD, so I often talk about them together. And so today I want to talk about the side effect of those two things, which is memory loss. Okay, if you feel like at one time in your life you had an awesome memory. I've had some of my clients tell me they had photographic memories, or they could remember details to almost anything, right? And now they feel like they can't even remember what happened 2 days ago. So if you feel like your memory has changed and you've been through narcissistic abuse, you might be battling complex PTSD, you're going to want to watch this video. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about why memory loss is often a side effect of complex PTSD or narcissistic abuse. We're going to understand the dynamics as to why it happens, because I feel like when you don't know, right, you don't have the understanding, it's hard to really relate and actually want to do something about what you're learning, right? So, but when you understand it and it makes sense, then that motivates you to want to, heal and move forward. So the interesting thing about narcissistic abuse is the fact that it can create in someone complex PTSD. In other words, we know what PTSD is, right? It's when you've been through something traumatic. It can be a one-time thing, but it was so traumatic that it has affected you, it has changed you, and it shows up in your life. It's very easy to identify PTSD. The problem with narcissistic abuse and complex PTSD is the fact that it's a lot harder to identify, because often it wasn't like this one huge thing that happened and now you've been changed. It was a slow, consistent, chronic, methodical way of stress and different manipulation tactics that just seeped into your life, sometimes barely detectable at the time. In fact, a lot of my clients in my face-to-face coaching tell me, Michelle, but I don't think I had trauma. I don't think I had trauma in childhood. I don't think it was trauma, because the kind of abuse that comes as a result of narcissistic abuse is often emotional, psychological, and it often flies under the radar. But whether you are aware of the fact that you've been through trauma or not, on a conscious level, your brain very well knows that it is going through trauma. And the brain is pretty amazing, okay? The brain recognizes that you're going through trauma and it rewires itself so as to handle the trauma, the chronic stress, the constant state of survival, fight or flight. It rewires itself in an effort to try to handle that state better. It kind of reminds me of the show Person of Interest. Don't know if you guys seen it, but it's a series having to do with an AI computer. And the computer was so intelligent that when it was under attack, it literally rewired itself in an effort to save itself. Well, it's kind of what your brain does when it's going through trauma. So what are some things that happen when you're in that chronic state of stress? How is your brain rewired? Well, everyone knows that if you're in a relationship that is emotionally or psychologically abusive, there is a tremendous amount of stress that you're undergoing on a daily basis. When that happens, then your body is constantly being flooded with stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol all the time, right? When that's happening, the brain responds, okay? Large amounts of cortisol cause an automatic shrinking in your hippocampus. Well, guess what your hippocampus is made to do? It's made to process your short-term memory. Without what it needs to process your short-term memory, whatever is going on doesn't get shifted into your long-term memory. It's like it's there one day or 1 minute at times, it can feel like, and gone the next. So that's one thing that happens. The other thing is the fact that your brain wants to keep you safe. So one of its coping skills to keep you safe, right? You're the host of your brain. So the way it keeps you safe to keep itself safe is that It will delete anything that hurts. If you don't believe this, think about what happens with children in childhood. If they've undergone something completely traumatic, they don't recall that. Sometimes years, decades can go by, and then with a child not even recognizing that they had a trauma in their past because their brain either deleted it or compartmentalized it, and it's out of sight, out of mind, until something happens that opens that door. So along with your hippocampus shrinking, now you have a brain that wants to delete for you anything that is truly harmful, that's causing you emotional distress, because it thinks it's helping you. It thinks it's keeping you safe. So that's another reason why your memory gets affected, because your brain's behind every stressful event, deleting it. When I'm working with clients that are still in a relationship with a toxic person, right? And maybe they're trying to kind of have some clarity in their life. Sometimes they'll tell me things are really bad, and then the next time they'll tell me things aren't so bad. And so what I'll often have them do is just keep track. Keep track of what happens. Don't judge it. Don't try to change it. Just start noticing what happens on a daily basis and what they're feeling on a daily basis. And I often get people that come back in the span of 1 week, and they'll be like, Michele, I cannot believe the amount of things that happened this week. And I'm beginning to see that this week is normal. This is like a normal thing in my life. But if I didn't write it down, I wouldn't even remember what was going on. So part of it is because of what's happening with your hippocampus. Part of it is because your brain is wanting to keep you safe. And then the rest is because of the manipulations like gaslighting and word salad that have you spinning and spinning in circles in conversations that are going all over the place, that it's impossible to kind of feel grounded in what's going on. So when you look at it like that, it's really, really easy to understand how your memory gets affected and how your brain starts to rewire itself. But it gets a little worse, okay? Your brain also can become addicted to the trauma, okay? So you think about if somebody's takes a drug that gives them dopamine, right? Well, their body sees that they're getting the dopamine from this drug and stops producing it on their own. And that's how they become addicted to the drug, because your body wants that dopamine again. Well, your body can do that with trauma as well. When you're going through that abuse cycle, right, where everything's amazing in the relationship and the person is just, they're giving you or showing you the pieces of themselves that caused you to want to be with them, guess what your brain is doing? It's releasing dopamine. And it feels amazing. Right when you get used to feeling it amazing, boom, it gets horrible again. Well, what happens? Now your body is releasing all the stress hormones, right? And it's pushing you, those stress hormones are pushing you to reconcile, to make peace, to get to that place again that you just were. And when it happens again, that rush of dopamine comes in. And then your body gets stuck in that cycle. And it thinks it's normal. So when that happens, your brain winds up getting addicted to the trauma itself. And breaking free of that feels horrible. You would think that leaving something bad for you would feel good, right? But it doesn't. It feels horrible because of the addiction that's happened in your brain. So I don't want to go too much into that because I really just wanted to focus on memory loss, but there's really a lot involved. And when you understand the different components of what happens with your brain, with your nervous system, then you can have more compassion for yourself as you're breaking free of relationships that are harmful or traumatic for you. But if you are wondering, okay, if you're at this point and you're like, well, I wonder if my brain was ever stuck in, addicted to the trauma or rewiring itself because of the trauma. Here's a few questions you can ask yourself. While you were in the relationship, did you ever deny that anything was wrong, right? Did you ever either try to convince yourself or try to convince others that everything was normal? Something to think about. okay? Because denial is one of the things that the brain uses as a coping skill against trauma. The second thing is compartmentalizing. Did you ever compartmentalize the bad and only focus on the good? Right? So for example, that would show up in a way like maybe you're talking to somebody about what's going on, and one day you're like really frustrated about what happened, so you explain what happened, and part of you is just explaining to you, it's like a normal thing that you're going through, right? But you're expressing it, and the other person is in shock. They're like looking at you like, are you serious? Like, that is so not normal. But you've just explained it, and then the next week, and this is, of course, if you're still in the relationship, the next week you talk to that person again and they're like, are you okay? You know, is everything okay? And suddenly you're like, of course, everything's fine. Like, that was nothing. That was just a little thing. No, we've been great for these past 3 hours. Everything's been amazing. Almost like your brain has just completely turned off all the pain of what was just happening and is completely highlighting only the positive. Something to think about. And the last thing that you can ask yourself, do you project onto the other person? Now, that's an interesting question because we're used to hearing how narcissists or toxic people project onto you, right? We're used to hearing that they project. Well, guess what? If you are in a relationship with somebody that's toxic and your brain is rewiring itself, you can have the tendency to project your good qualities onto them. And you're waiting for them to respond a certain way because that's how you would respond. And you're waiting for them to get it. And you're hoping and you're trying harder because you know if they just get it, they would change because that's what you would do. Okay? Those are just some things that you can ask yourself if you're wondering if your brain was ever affected or is affected with a toxic relationship that you might be in. So I hope this information helps. I try to put up as much free information as possible, but always remember that if the videos aren't enough, there are so many resources that can help you to start moving forward and shifting in your emotional growth journey. I have a 3-month online Breakthrough CPTSD workshop that starts in November. If you prefer to not get one-on-one coaching for whatever reason, then a group workshop is an amazing resource to not only learn how to heal, but to do so in an environment that provides validation and support all at the same time. So make sure you check out those links. I always leave them in the description box below. They are extra resources that will help you to move and shift forward.